Good Shabbat, everyone. There's no doubt all of us are very good about asking God for what we want. At times we have our priorities in order. We ask God to give us health, to give us strength, to give us wisdom. And at other times, not maybe as much. God, help me win the lottery, or help my team win the big game. Clearly, God heard my prayers last night. But my friends, do you ever wonder, what does God ask of us? We have requests of God all the time. But what's the number one request that God has for you and me? Maybe in this week's Torah portion of Vayetze, we can find an answer. What does God want most from us? This morning, we read the story of Jacob and his sisters, Leah and Rachel. And we're all familiar with the story. We know that Jacob works for Laban for 7 years in order to marry his youngest daughter, Rachel. But on the night of the wedding, Laban substitutes his oldest daughter, Leah, for Rachel. And the next morning, Jacob appears shocked that he appeared with Leah. He realizes he's been deceived. How is that possible? How could Jacob not know that he was marrying Leah? I mean, I get to officiate at a lot of weddings. I'm married myself. I think I would know if I would have ended up with my wife's sister. I mean, if Jacob watched Rachel for 7 years, waiting to marry her, how could he not know that he was actually marrying her sister, Leah? How could he be so easily fooled? Now, in our tradition, when there's a problem in the Torah, a difficult question, the rabbis give us a midrash, a story, to give us an answer to a question. And I think the following story helps explain this problem and also gives you and I a better idea of what does God want most from us. So the midrash teaches that when the first temple was destroyed and the people are brought to Babylonia as slaves, a who's who of Jewish legends come before God asking for God's mercy. In their own ways, they each beg God, let your people return to their land and rebuild their temple. So first, it's Abraham who comes before God. He comes before God weeping, striking his face, rending his garments, lamenting and crying, reminding God that he was a complete man of faith. He never doubted God. He passed all of God's tests, even willing to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. Surely on his merit, because of his faith in God, God will let the people return to their land and rebuild the temple. But God rejects Abraham's pleas. It's not enough. So Isaac and Jacob then come before God and offer the same type of request. They remind God that they never doubted God. They had complete faith. They were so devout, never compromising their emunah, their faith. But they too are missing something. God still does not change his mind. And then Moses comes before God to make his case. He always listened to God. He did whatever God said, taking the people out of the desert, following God's instructions, but God still doesn't relent. What is missing? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, none of them are successful. There's something they didn't do. So in one last effort, Rachel comes before God. And the Midrash tells us that she reminds God of something that she did that none of the other greats of our tradition did. Something even more important to God. That on the night of that wedding that she dreamed about for 7 long years, her wedding night, the night she was supposed to marry Jacob, the man who had worked day after day in the scorching sun and on freezing nights just to earn the right to be with her. But Rachel knew who her father Laban really was. She knew that he was planning something awful. She knew, and she realized that her father intended to switch her sister Leah into the chuppah in her place. and her heart broke. She loved her sister, and she knew how humiliating, how devastating it would be for her older sister Leah if Jacob discovered in the middle of the ceremony that he was actually marrying Leah. So Rachel acted with extraordinary compassion. She created secret signs, private cues between herself and Jacob, ways for him to know for sure that it was her, Rachel, was the one he was marrying. Those signs were her guarantee that Laban's trick could never work. And yet, she gave all those signs away. She taught those secret signs to Leah, knowing full well what it meant, knowing that Jacob would think he was marrying Rachel, when in fact, it would be Leah under the chuppah. But Rachel was so compassionate, she didn't even stop there. The Midrash says that Rachel even hid nearby. Some of the rabbis say literally under the marriage bed. And when Jacob spoke tenderly to who he believed was Rachel, Leah didn't answer. She couldn't. So Rachel answered for her, mimicking her own voice so that Jacob would not realize what Laban had done. Think about that. Rachel, the woman Jacob adored, gave up her wedding night, her joy, her place beside the man she loved and loved her, all to protect her sister from shame. And Rachel, she chose compassion over competition, dignity over jealousy, sisterhood over self. All of it so that her older sister Leah would not be embarrassed. All of it because she could not bear to see her sister humiliated, even at the cost of her own happiness. So she reminds God of all of this, and God is finally moved. And the Midrash ends by telling us, God declares, for Rachel, I will restore the people of Israel back to their land of Israel, and the temple can be rebuilt. That Midrash gives us our answers. Maybe now we can understand how Jacob was deceived. It was Rachel's devotion to another human being, her older sister Leah. And we also see from this story an answer to my original question this morning. The most important thing that God wants from you and from me, there's nothing more important to God than acts of Gimilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. More than faith, more than sacrifices to God, it's how you and I treat other people. Rabbi Joseph Kalushkin tells the story that he once commented to his friend Dennis Prager how much pleasure he got when he saw his two little daughters playing lovingly with each other. And Prager asked, doesn't it give you more pleasure than if one of your daughters said, I love you, Daddy, but didn't act nicely to her sister? Of course, Kalushkin answered. And Prager responded, I imagine God is the same way. God derives greater pleasure when people are good to each other than when they are good to him, but not to each other. I can relate. When my 3 young adult children want to hang with each other, when they call each other, when I hear them tell each other they love each other, it brings me so much happiness. My wife Lisa and I can have the greatest plan, the nicest dinner planned with one of our kids, and they can call at the very last minute and say, never mind, I'm going out with my sister or brother. I'm more than fine with it. Because there's nothing that brings me greater happiness as a father than when my kids are good to each other. And I do agree with Prager. I think perhaps God is the same way. More concerned about how you and I treat our fellow humankind. As the great Rabbi Hillel taught years ago, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That's the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. My friends, during this great season of Thanksgiving, may we be all thankful for those in our lives who complete acts of loving kindness for us. And may we all continue to accomplish more and more acts of loving kindness towards our fellow human beings. Shabbat Shalom.